Outside the courtroom, there was a media frenzy. Reporters, holding microphones, were waiting for Harold, but he wasn't in the mood to speak. He simply said, "Ranger was, is, and will always be a hero." Then he walked straight to the bench where he often sat, the old bench outside the police academy. Memories began to flood his mind. There was a time when Harold had it all: a job, respect, a circle of friends. Then time changed, friends turned their backs, and his job was lost. But one thing never changed: Ranger. Their bond wasn't just that of a cop and a dog. It was the bond of a man and his loyal companion. Ranger never left his side, whether it was the fatigue of the evening, the pressure of a case, or their personal struggles. Ranger was always there. When Harold saw his old friend, an old memory resurfaced. Once, Harold had been in the hospital after a heart attack. The doctors had said, "This man is more stubborn than courageous." But Harold knew. The only thing that had kept his life tethered at that moment was one reason: Ranger hadn't moved from his hospital bed. The hospital hours were full of pain, but Ranger had forgotten his own needs, focusing entirely on saving his owner's life. When the doctors had stepped away, Ranger had tucked himself in close to Harold, his mind silent, just being there for his owner. At that moment, he was only with his master, not thinking of anything else. In the flashback, the doctor had said, "Just a dog, send him home." But Harold, in a weak voice, had said, "He's not just a dog, he's my breath." Ranger was silent, but his eyes spoke volumes. "I'm here. You'll be fine." The doctor had looked at Ranger but couldn't understand how a dog could be so connected to its owner. It wasn't just a relationship. It was a commitment, something only Ranger and Harold shared. When the judge had delivered the ruling, there were still some people who weren't convinced. A senior official had said outside the courtroom, "Is it right to give animals such legal importance?" But Harold knew. This fight wasn't just for Ranger. It was for those who couldn't speak but could feel. It was for all loyal beings who remind humanity of what true meaning is. This fight was for those who were masters at hiding their pain, but never backed down from their truth. The proof of Ranger's purity and loyalty was in his eyes. In those eyes, there was a fire that never left anyone behind. Every moment, when he looked at Harold, he was just with his master, fulfilling his duty, and his loyalty was in Harold's heart. Ranger had now grown old. It was harder for him to walk, but his eyes still sparkled whenever Harold called his name. One night, Harold saw him sitting by his medals. Maybe he had realized his time was near. Harold held his head and said, "If you leave, where will I go?" Ranger licked his hand as if saying, "I never leave. I'll always be right here, close to your heart." That night, Harold understood the deepest emotions any human feels for their partner. There was something in his heart that words couldn't express, but with Ranger, he had lived every moment to the fullest. After that day, whenever Harold felt the pain or sorrow of life, he remembered his old friend. In Ranger's eyes there was a purity that didn't need words. Their loyalty was so deep that words were never necessary. In the last courtroom appearance, a few months later, Harold was back in court, not as a witness for another case, but with a request. He held a small box in his hands. He placed the box in front of the judge and said, "This is Ranger's badge, and this is a letter." The badge wasn't just a symbol of metal. It represented Ranger's loyalty and the efforts he put in for his owner. This badge was not just a piece of metal. It was a memento of every moment when a man and his dog had risked their lives for their country. This badge symbolized how Ranger was a companion to his master. Whether in difficult times or any tough situation, he never forgot his duty. His only purpose was to stand by his master. The judge, surprised, asked, "Is this a will?" Harold shook his head and said, "This is his legacy. I want this badge to remain in the Academy's museum so that every new recruit remembers. Being a hero doesn't require being human." A deep silence fell once again in the courtroom. This wasn't just a story of a dog and a man. It was an example for all those who never turn away from their loyalty. It was a relationship where both man and animal risk their lives for one another. It was a lesson for those who express their duty in every step they take and never leave their master's side, no matter the situation. The judge lifted the box, looked at it, and said, Ranger wasn't just Harold's companion. He was the pride of this system. Harold looked up for a moment as if seeing Ranger. Then he softly said, You've gone, but your loyalty, your love, it's here. In the heart of every person who fights for